All right, a lot to cover here, but we know a little bit more about the rift between the president and his outgoing Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, that ultimately led to her resignation. New exclusive NBC News reporting finds that President Trump has 4 months urged his administration to reinstate large-scale separation of migrant families crossing the border. That's according to 3 U.S. officials with knowledge of the meetings at the White House. But Nielsen resisted, putting her directly at odds with the president. And now Nielsen is out after nearly 16 months on the job. So let's take a look at some of the policies she had a hand in. Policies that the president thought were too soft. She took over in December 2017, replacing John Kelly, one of her closest allies. Shortly thereafter, she was criticized by the president for an uptick in illegal immigration. Nielsen oversaw the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy that separated more than 2,800 migrant children from their parents. Nearly a year later, some of these families remain separated. Secretary Nielsen defended the policy, at first insisting that the administration had no such policy, and later saying that other administrations had done the same and that it was up to Congress to fix the problem. But despite her denials, the evidence was clear. Images of children in cages, recordings of children crying out for their parents. There were other policies that put her back into the president's good graces. Back in October, she defended the president when he deployed more than 5,000 troops to the southern border. She also blocked Border Patrol agents when they used tear gas to repel a large crowd attempting to break a border fence near San Diego. And she had a hand in an experimental policy known as migrant protection protocols, which require those who are seeking asylum to wait in Mexico while their cases make their way through U.S. courts. Now, none of these controversial policies seem to work. Customs and Border Protection estimates that apprehensions at the border reached nearly 100,000 in March. That's the highest number in nearly a decade. Now, if you think of all of this and you think it's bad, it gets worse. As Speaker Nancy Pelosi notes, it is deeply alarming that the Trump administration official who put children in cages is reportedly resigning because she's not extreme enough for the White House's liking. The president announced that Andrew McAleenan, the Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, will take over for Nielsen as acting DHS secretary. The attorney has said that it was his job to enforce the laws, not to make them. Of course, he was the head of Customs and Border Protection during the separation of migrant children from their families and has not ruled out family separation as an option moving forward. Joining me now is Jason Ahern. He currently serves on the Homeland Security Advisory Council and was the former acting commissioner of Customs and Border Patrol. Jason, good to have you here. You signed a letter supporting Kirstjen Nielsen in her post back in 2017. Has your view on her changed since then?
No, not at all. I think one of the things you have to take a look at the current situation facing the country, and it certainly is a humanitarian crisis, but let's not lose sight of the fact there's also a border security crisis happening right now on our border, because as the Border Patrol agents are actually focusing on providing the most humanitarian care they can for the families, they're also being taken away from the frontline border security mission, which is keeping terrorists and bad other implements of terror and drugs out of the country.
However, Secretary Nielsen, whom you supported, had pushed a notion that there were, this is one of the many things she's done. She pushed the notion that there were more than 3,700 known or suspected terrorists who were stopped trying to cross the border, according to Customs and Border Patrol data. In reality, there were 6 immigrants who were in the terrorism database who crossed over. But President Trump continued to push that narrative that she had started. Even when confronted by our reporters, she didn't recant that. She lied. Jason?
I lost you there right at the minute. Could you repeat that last part, because we had a little break in the connection?
Sorry. She had spread this idea of 3,755 migrants who were on the terrorist list when, in fact, there were 6. I mean, she was shown to have lied about that, and that continues to be a rallying cry for the president. So, you know, doesn't that sort of change your view of all those people involved in this right now?
No, it doesn't change my view. I think one of the things when you take a look at the numbers, they can be represented in a variety of different ways, whether that was the context, the amount of people that were coming into the country or trying to get into the country that were on the terrorist database, or whether that was the precise number that was on a border.
But that's 3,700 versus 6, right? That's not close.
Yeah, but the thing is, we think we need to take a look at. We certainly don't want to even have one exception of individuals.
I agree with you. But why lie about the number then?
Well, I can't speak to the numbers, what the motive might have been, and how they were represented.
I guess my point, Jason, is that I want to hear your opinion on this. She's proved to have lied about something that was very key to this thing, and you continue to support her.
I continue to support the mission of the Department of Homeland Security, who will be having a new secretary after Wednesday of this week. And I'm not going to go back and turn back the hands of time of what was represented in the press, because I want to see the entire context. But I can tell you the frontline men and women need to have leadership going forward. This is very challenging times to be actually changing out our secretary.
People say that the president's looking for somebody tougher than Kirstjen Nielsen was. I sort of laid out the degree to which she was, most people would say, is pretty tough. Kevin McAleenan has said that he supports aid to Central American countries and other solutions to help curb the influx of people who are coming to the U.S. border. That's completely at odds with the president's perspective. So now what happens?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But when you take a look at any challenge, you have to take a look, much like the military does, looking at a defense-in-depth strategy. And that's beginning at looking at the pull factors, and what's happening here in the United States, but beginning, what are the pushing factors that occur down in those Northern Triangle countries of Central America? What's being done from an economic standpoint, from a rule of law standpoint, and a poverty standpoint to see what you can do to make that environment better for individuals so they don't feel the need to come here and making a very significant and treacherous journey to the United States. That has to be looked at. I would begin with looking at what's happening there, what's happening in Mexico, and then also then what happens at our border.
So that's a nuanced view of this that the president and his immigration advisors don't seem to share.
Well, certainly there's a lot of disagreement with some of the things that come out of any administration. This one's no different. But I do believe from experience of over 30 years, you need to be taking a look at the point of origin and what can you do to stabilize the nations in those areas. Jason,
thanks for joining me. Jason Ahern currently serves on the Homeland Security Advisory Council and was a former acting commissioner of Customs and Border Patrol. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Kirstjen Nielsen is now the 11th cabinet-level member of the Trump administration to leave or get fired. Let's take a look at some of the notable departures. Reince Priebus was forced out of his post as the president's chief of staff. He was replaced by John Kelly. Secretary of Health and Human Services Tom Price resigned amid controversy for spending nearly $400,000 on chartered flights. Rex Tillerson was famously fired via Twitter from his post as Secretary of State. Secretary of Veteran Affairs David Shulkin was fired from the administration over a damning Inspector General report that criticized unethical actions and wasteful spending. Next up, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt resigned after facing a number of controversies after the president criticized Attorney General Jeff Sessions over his decision to recuse himself from the Russia probe. He was fired in November of 2018. Chief of Staff John Kelly resigned from his post in December, and a few days later, the Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, announced his resignation. And before the month was up, Secretary of Defense James Mattis resigned after clashing with the president over Syria. This year, head of the Small Business Administration, Linda McMahon, resigned from her post. And of course, late last night, Kirstjen Nielsen became the latest cabinet member to leave her position as DHS Secretary. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.